I apologize, I'm kind of throwing my documents up. Okay. The City Council Committee on Ordinances, Licenses, and Legal Affairs, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, will meet remotely on Tuesday, April 26th at 6 p.m. for the purpose of discussing zoning ordinance relative to urban agriculture, zoning ordinance relative to green infrastructure via remote participation in accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 as amended by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022. The subcommittee meetings are held to take action for the purposes of making recommendations to the full council. Individuals may participate remotely in the meeting via a remote participation platform called Zoom. Members of the public and/or parties with the right and/or requirement to attend this meeting may access the remote participation meeting through any one of the following ways. Click on the link posted in the agenda to join the webinar and enter webinar ID 879-819-5274, password 838382, or via telephone 877-853-5257, same webinar ID and password as noted above. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the recording proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so on matters not requiring a public hearing, we will post on the City of Salem's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Sorry, getting there. In attendance this evening are all members of the OLA committee, absent are none. And we also have from the Committee of the Whole, Councillor Merkel, Councillor Watson-Felt, Councillor Marcillo, from the city, Beth Bernard, Jenna Ide, and Casey Moscos. Am I missing anyone? Councillor Hepworth? And we also, it looks like we have Amanda Chiancola from the planning department in the attendees as well. Amanda, I can promote you to panelist if you're here to speak to the planning item, just raise your hand. Councillor Cohen?
I move that we reverse the order of the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Cohen moves to change the order of the agenda for this evening. So we have posted that urban agriculture is first, followed by green infrastructure. Is there a second to switch that? Seconded by Councillor Prosnitsky. So moved. So we will switch that. Thank you. It makes it a little easier as Councillor Varela will be recusing himself for urban agriculture, so we can speak first to the green infrastructure, finish that up, and then move to urban agriculture. So for this evening, for green infrastructure, and I'll note that Councillor McLean also joins. This evening, for green infrastructure, we have joining us Jenna Ide, Beth Bernard, and Casey to speak to this as well. This is our second meeting in OLA on the green infrastructure ordinance, and I can pull up, or Cassie, if you'd like to. There was a very robust conversation at our last OLA meeting around the ordinance that went to joint public hearing and then went to the planning board. There was lots of feedback provided on some edits that we were hoping to see to help us feel, for the committee to feel more comfortable with moving forward on a draft of the ordinance. So Casey, if you don't mind filling us in on the revisions that you were able to complete and come up with. And as Ola knows, these were placed in these were shared with Ola for all to see. But Casey, I think it would be helpful if you could walk us through those red lines.
Yeah, I have them pulled up on my screen. Do you want me to go ahead and share that?
I think that would be helpful, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Alrighty, so kind of starting at the top with the use table, there was a lot of talk, a lot of concern about the large scale ground mounted energy systems. There was questions if whether or not we could kind of pull out certain uses and allow it in certain uses in those zoning districts, but not in other uses in the zoning district. It's kind of our understanding. I didn't see any examples where we kind of exempt that here or do something similar with other uses. So it would be staff's recommendation that you make it tighter for now, also to help you stay within the four corners of the legal ad. And if you wanted to, as a council, as a body, later on down the road, investigate kind of loosening it up or maybe creating a new zoning district for some of those uses that you either definitely don't want it in or do want to allow it in, and creating a separate zoning district kind of for those uses. So if there was like concerns that they wouldn't be allowed in parks, but any other RC district, creating a separate zoning district for parks, and all of the parks could go in there. And then you could say no large scale or no solar here. And it could be allowed in RC, but I think that's a step for a later date for you guys to investigate, given the time constraints and the kind of the limitations of the legal ad for this ordinance. Staff would just recommend making it a little bit tighter this time around and investigating that later.
Thank you. So just for clarification, recommending removing or revising from the planning board note in the zoning table to an N is your
Yes.
suggestion. Councillor Cohen?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi. I have a question through you to the city solicitor, because I have a lot of concern about one of the edits that came up at the last meeting. And Jen and I both talked about this. I do not believe that you can make canopy solar on a parking lot part of a rooftop definition. It is the industry standard that canopies are ground mount solar. It is the definition of ground mount that they're installed into the ground. And rooftop solar is for anything that's on an existing or an actual roof. So my question through you, Chair Riccardi, to the city solicitor is within the four corners, can we add under E accessory use a line for canopies that would take the definition that was incorporated into rooftop solar for canopies and have a line of zoning into this zoning table?
Ooh, so canopies are, let me understand this. A canopy is akin to a ground mounted solar energy system, but on a smaller scale?
No, a canopy would be, could be any size. It could be, over a driveway, but typically it would be over a parking lot. I know Jen has installed some of these. The company I work for has done many of these. It would be a pole or a mount that's mounted into the ground, for example, over the high school parking lot. And on top of the mounts would be a structure, typically solar panels would comprise the roof. And that's what I'm referring to as the canopy. We had talked about this at the last meeting about being able to accommodate this kind of installation in Salem because, for example, many of the school parking lots, I think Jenna had pointed this out, are in different zones, different, they're not all in one zone. And that way the city could accommodate having those. And that's a great way for the city to realize solar energy.
That's something I'm going to have to look at further, Counselor. The way you've described it, I don't see that within the four corners of this. I'm going to have to look at that further. We'll have to have a separate conversation. I have to right off the top of my head, I would say no. But I'm gonna have to look at it further.
Okay, I'll just follow up, but I saw that Jenna had her hand up, so she may have some more insight into this. My belief is that to have an ordinance like this be viable, we need to be able to have a way to install canopy solar on things like city parking lots. And without that, it would be problematic. And I do not believe that it's appropriate to have a definition of rooftop solar that would incorporate this kind of canopies. It would be like saying the way to get around having a chainsaw is to call it a screwdriver, in my mind.
So, Counselor, have you seen the structure at heading down into the Dearmansport Yacht Club on the left-hand side?
I haven't, but Endicott College has them, for example.
Is that what you're talking about?
They have them at Endicott College.
Yeah, it could be a carport is what it looks like.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's hear from Jenna and Cassie, if that's okay.
I just wanted to sort of a little bit, one, state that, you know, when we looked at the zoning map, significant part was in this portion. And I guess a little bit, it seemed like we went in a direction which I, based upon our commitment to zero net energy, I really do feel like we need to encourage more than discourage. And I'm a little unclear as to the concerns about ground mounted solar in a residential district versus somebody building a single family home and cutting down and a lawn, which they would be perfectly, I don't think there's any constraint from them doing that. So I mean, I don't know of any impacts from ground mounted solar environmental, certainly during construction, but if somebody can build a single family house and cut down trees, then they can, that's the only comparable impact. But otherwise, ground mounted solar is about as least impact as you get for a use, unless you're going to actually buy the land and conserve it. If it's privately held and somebody does something with it, it's going to have an impact. And I would say solar, and I hope we're not sort of implying that there's an impact of solar with this. I think if you want to ban it in those areas, that's a decision, but I think we have to make clear there's no environmental impact from solar compared to a single family residential. If you're concerned about cutting down trees, which is the only real impact I can think of. I just think a little bit, I thought the planning board review was a better way to deal with that by making sure that in those districts, which are significant and probably some of the best opportunities we have, that we review it and try to make the best project possible. We have not had any ground mounted solar proposed. And this is within the best incentives that we've had. Those incentives have gotten worse and worse, or I should say they've gotten less beneficial. So I think we're sort of a little bit implying that there's something bad's going to happen if somebody puts in solar, which one, I don't think will much happen. Two, if it did, I'm not sure of the impact compared to single family home, what the difference would be as far as environmental impact. So I just hope we clarify that there's no real impact from that. If you can't cut down your trees when you build a single family home, then, you know, I guess that's the difference. But, you know, I just want to clarify, and on Jeff's point, these canopies are, you know, I mean, I guess there was consideration that it could be an accessory use, and you would only put a canopy up. You would not put a ground mounted, you would not put up a canopy unless you had another use on the site, because it's more expensive than ground mounted because you have to put in the poles. So, but I think we do want some clarity around that to make sure people don't confuse the two, because there seems to be some confusion. So if any way we can clarify that a carport is, you know, that the canopy's style is not ground mounted. And I just, once again, reiterate the importance of us getting to our goals, and, you know, how we can sort of promote more solar. You know, we certainly have a long way to go. So in that respect. So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. And I apologize, I have a cold, so I sound really bad. So.
No worries. Thank you, Jenna. And I see, Cassie, I see that your hand is up too as well. And I also wanted to know if this would be the time to point out the edit further down around the definition that you had in there. But Cassie, if you had a comment to make.
Yeah, I wanted to touch base on the reasoning, I guess, that we felt it was okay to put or to include a clause for the canopy style systems in the roof mounted, because from a planning perspective and from a use perspective and how they're going to function, they're going to function like roof mounted solar energy systems. And so I understand that while the industry will classify them as a ground mounted system, it's going to function like a roof mounted system. It's going to be on top of a structure in a parking lot. And it's going to be on a roof. Like if we're putting very large carports in, even if they're being installed for the sole purpose of putting solar panels on them, that is still a very large structure. And so from a permitting standpoint, at least a building permitting standpoint, a site planning perspective, and a use perspective, that very much falls in under a roof mounted system in the eyes, I would say, in the eyes of planners. And so that is why we wanted to kind of add that clarification to that definition that way. And then it would be permitted in all the zoning districts, because roof mounted solar is an accessory use, which is permitted in all of the districts. And so I don't really see it as the workaround of calling a chainsaw a screwdriver to get around it, because it's in functionality, it's functioning as a roof mounted system. And so, industries often have different terms that are more nuanced and more specific than what we always capture in a zoning code. We try to go a little bit broader. Like when we talk about boat manufacturing, we don't get into the nitty gritty of whether it's a yacht or a john boat or a sailboat or a shrimp boat. Like they're boats, like they float on the water and you can ride in them. So it's kind of that kind of category of, it's a solar energy system on top of a roof structure, on top of a structure, and therefore it's on the roof. And so that's why we just wanted to add that clarification there. Even though, the industry might consider it something else, that is why we felt it was appropriate to add it, to just clarify in the definition.
Could you scroll down? Oh, sorry, Cassie. Could you scroll down to that definition so we can see how you worded that? And I believe the comment on there was from Beth about discussion of it. So I was curious if Beth had any further thoughts on the revision of that, or what Cassie just said.
I agree with Cassie. What I understood Councilor Cohen to say was this is some kind of a structure independent of a carport, for example, where you would attach the solar panels. I understood it to be a separate accessory structure.
Let me clarify what I was saying, if that's okay. Two things. I want to address something that Jenna said, and then I'll go back to the canopy. And Jenna and I talked about this. There is somewhat of a myth that anyone who has a yard is going to put ground mount solar in their yard. It's much more expensive, even though it is more productive per square foot to have ground mount solar, because you can pitch and orient the panels ideally. When you do roof mounted solar, you already have a roof structure, so it's a lot less money. Now, to go to what I was trying to say is, if it was true that any solar array had to be on a structure such as a roof, which 99% of all solar is on a structure, then we wouldn't have already differences in the ordinance from ground mount to rooftop. We have those definitions, and it's not just because the industry standard is that there's a difference between ground mount solar and roof mount. But in many cases, the permitting is different because you have to create a structure in the ground. You have to penetrate the ground. There may be issues with, gas lines or other things in the ground. You don't just stick a pole in the ground and put solar panels on it. So I'm not trying to be too specific. I'm trying to reflect something that would encourage more of what we need in Salem. I do think we need more canopies. We need to have canopies over some of our parking lots. We need to have more solar installed on public parking lots, for example. And so I do not agree that, all solar is the same, because if it was, then this ordinance would only be talking about rooftop solar. And the reason that this ordinance came about was that a reaction to the proposed solar farm on Swampscott Road. And, I had a great meeting with Cassie and Tom and Jenna about the ordinance when it first kicked off and why it was so important. There's really very few issues. I don't think anyone on this meeting can identify an issue that people have had permitting or installing solar on residential properties. It's not why this ordinance exists. And I'm just reinforcing what Jenna said. And I think that we need to make sure that our zoning and our definitions are correct. And all I was asking Beth is if we can find a way of having a separate definition that's reflected in the zoning chart.
Is that definition, if you see the definition here when she added elevated solar structures, is that the definition that you're seeking? Is it an elevated solar structure?
I believe that in red should not be part of roof-mounted solar system. That should be a separate definition of, canopy, ground-mounted solar. That's what it is. When you install solar at Danversport or, Endicott College, or if we do it on the high school parking lot, it is not going to be considered a rooftop system. I'm just saying that we do definitions not only so that the people who are writing the ordinance understand it, but so the developer or the customer understand what the ordinance is about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I just don't think that this wording is appropriate as it's written and revised in this ordinance.
I don't know what the timing is of this ordinance. Councilor Riccardi, where are we with respect to the dates?
Yes. My assistant actually just brought me my paper from the printer that I printed out, being my 10-year-old assistant. So our dates are the joint public hearing closed on the 7th. So 90 days is June 5th. So we have time. The first passage has to be the 12th.
Yeah, I'd like to look at this further and work with staff on something along the lines Councilor Cohen is talking about. And I need to look at what the ad said with respect to the joint public hearing. So I don't think I can give you a clear opinion right now.
Okay. There are other edits with it, and Jenna, I see that your hand is up to see if a comment to that, but I also wanted to note that there are other edits that Cassie made that I'd like to run through to see if there are any additional questions or concerns that are popped up. Jenna, did you have anything to add to that or comment before? Because I know your time is limited.
Yeah, I was just reiterating, I do think it is confusing. I understand where Cassie's coming from, but I do think that it really, a ground-mounted structure, carport, is just taking your structure and making it taller. So it's just the distance. And there's talk of paving in there and things like that. I'm not sure that's necessary because a lot of times these are put over a variety of reasons, and we don't want to necessarily encourage somebody to pave something they don't need to. So I think we do have to work on it. But since Beth said she was, I think we have to work through that, definition.
Okay, so I will just note, working through that definition while we do have time, it's a limited time, so I would ask for a week at the most to meet again on this. But again, there are other items, and also if there are any other comments on the zoning table before we move on. I know that there were comments at our past meeting, so I don't know if there are other still comments or questions, or we can move on to the next revision. The committee or the committee of the whole. Okay, Cassie, do you mind then just going through the other red lines that you've made?
Yeah, so I feel like we also at the last meeting, there were a lot of concerns about, and it was kind of repeated several times, that it was like, we're okay with the smaller side of the ground mounted, but 40,000 square feet is a lot. So in response to that, later on, back down in the definitions, we edited those sizes to hopefully make you guys more comfortable with some of the yeses in this table. And that's just a starting point for conversation, but we'll get to that in a moment. We'll kind of zip through this. We struck the bicycle parking per your request, struck the vehicle charging stations per your request.
Can we stop at 6:12:3?
Yes.
Under citing preferences, I just have a question for planning here.
Mhm.
It says this in the second sentence, the city strongly discourages. And then in the last sentence, it says significant tree cutting is problematic. And I'm just throwing this out because we have a little time. To me, strongly discourages and problematic are not specific enough. I feel like we should either have like a disincentive attached to it, or, instead of, discouraging, I can discourage something, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So I just wanted to stop there, and maybe that those two sentences can be more specific.
We can take a look at that, Council. A good point of referencing the tree ordinance might be appropriate there. We can talk about that.
Yeah, I when we sent this out originally, and it was circulated, the tree warden, did have some concerns, which is why we added some of the language about the significant tree cutting. However, the tree ordinance really only covers trees in the public right of way. There isn't a lot of, I don't think there's any language that actually has any restrictions on tree cutting, like on your private property. There's no restrictions on that. So
there is a setback, though. There is a setback there.
So to a certain extent, like perhaps the tree ordinance needs to be strengthened as well, as opposed to necessarily putting it just related to solar. If tree canopy conservation is a goal, as a planner, I would recommend looking at the tree ordinance, because that would be more comprehensive for the whole city as opposed to just tied to this use. But I'll let Beth weigh in on that too.
Can I see your hand up?
Yeah, I just, I guess I agree with that, just because it seems to me, nobody's answered. If somebody can build a single family home in that district and cut down all the trees within their boundary of what its zoning allows, if we're trying to protect trees, I think we have to deal with that more comprehensively than sort of specifically within this. I don't, like I said, I think there's far more impact from a single family home than from solar. I guess the other is that, once again, I feel like we're having languages that discourages solar in general. So, and it's sort of implying that solar has an environmental impact. I would probably take out the importance of water management, because that's sort of making an assumption that actually you can build these on gravel, or you can build them on ground and other ways that they're actually just as water absorptive. And, actually the solar absorbs sun. So it's actually providing similar cooling benefit to trees. So I think we just, a little bit, I think we can take out some of these things that we're not, that don't necessarily have specific, what are we talking about? Because it's not all factual, and certainly things can be built. So we might want to say something more like, it should be built to ensure water infiltration and, ensuring that heat impacts and things like that. So sort of talking about the impacts or improving infiltration, rather than talking about the assumption that it will, because they don't have to be built like that. And like I said, there's no heat island impact because they absorb sun. So they're actually contributing to reducing cooling heat load.
Yeah, I think that there's also like when you're pairing the solar with other developments. So like if you're going to have a really large, use tropical products, they're wanting to build a new facility. And if, they want to put solar on the roof, that's absolutely okay. It's a permitted accessory use. It's okay. And I think this language would give the planning board some room to stand on if, instead of putting it on their roof, they wanted to clear cut an acre of trees that they had behind their site and put ground mounted solar back there. They could give the planning board some length to be like, we don't want it back there. Please put it on your roof instead. And it goes to then the adequacy of the various elements that the planning board has to find that they have developed or designed their site adequate. They have a whole checklist of things that they have to find. And if, saying that, per the solar ordinance, we are encouraging you to put it on the roof instead of clear cutting the trees at the back of your site to put ground mounted solar in. It just gives the planning board some kind of a leg to stand on to make that recommendation.
Thank you.
The solar as a vacuum saying it's bad.
Thank you. I want to note, I see Amanda Giancola is in the attendees and has her hand up. I'm going to allow her to talk to see if she has anything to add. I want to actually promote you, Amanda, to panelists, if you'd like to speak.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to note that language regarding, problematic, this is problematic, and I think there's one other piece to that. It's specific, it comes right from the model ordinance from the state's Department of Energy Resources. And the reason why it is a bit open and not specific is because DOER, the Departments of Energy and Resources, had noted that municipalities cannot prohibit or unreasonably regulate solar energy. So that's the reason that language is quite loose, because it's the DOER's recommendation to sort of keep it looser to make sure that it's not overly regulated. But it sounds like this committee is trying to make sure that it's not overregulated. But I just wanted to note that language does come directly from the model ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cohen, do you have a comment on that?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi. If we could go down a little bit to 6.12.5, you can leave it on that part. The end of that first paragraph where it says the SPGA shall also impose that sentence is very redundant, and I would suggest that we replace it with the SPGA shall impose any applicable conditions determined by the SPGA to be reasonably appropriate to improve the site design and serve the purposes of this section. And I'm going to move that we.
Can you repeat that, Counselor? I didn't understand what
Yeah.
you're moving to revise.
So
I see the sentence. It sounds
the
like you read it.
I'm going to move that we change that sentence to the SPGA shall also impose any applicable conditions determined by the SPGA to be reasonably appropriate to improve the site design and to serve the purposes of this section. It's just making it a little bit more specific and less redundant.
You know, I'm a visual person, so I thought I would type it for you guys.
Thank you. And are you moving to strike the sentence before that and replace it with this sentence, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Cass.
I have just a question, a general question about this special permit. We don't have the special permit authority noted anywhere in the zoning table. So at what point would this fall into the special permit granting authority? Like what projects would fall into this category?
So the special permit fell under the uses that had a PB underneath them. You have currently those are converted into no's. So this wouldn't actually apply to anything at the moment. If you don't plan to have anything be a special permit, you could probably strike this language altogether. I don't know how the city feels about keeping language in the event you change something back to it.
No, take it out if it's not on the table, take it out.
I believe that if we can create a definition and a zoning line for canopy solar, some of those zones might be best served to have special permits.
Well, yeah, let's recommend that we leave it in for now since we don't have a final stance on whether or not we will have. That was just more a question of do we even need that if we strike out the special permit from the zoning table? And then at that point, I'm thinking we're going to do, and if I'll take any discussions or comments on this edit, and then we'll do one vote at the end on the motions. Any comments or questions? And then we'll make that note of what, if it is referenced, we'll keep it in, and if it's not, we'll remove it. That way the motions won't get too confusing as to what's actually happening.
At the beginning of 612.6, under A, it says blueprints or drawings. I would just recommend or move that we change that to scale drawings or designs.
Any comments or questions on Councillor Cohen's revision there? Okay, next edit.
This is a stabilization. I believe somebody from the planning board had written in recommending that this be and revegetation instead of or revegetation, so that they'll have to stabilize the soil and put plants back if they take anything out. This one is just replacing town with city because we are a city, not a town. This is striking bicycle parking and electric.
I'm sorry, can you go up to the physical removal of all solar energy systems? BI. I'm sorry, Cass. Where it says physical removal of all solar system structures, equipment, security barriers and transmission lines from the site. I will move that we add, the owner will request an inspection by the building department within 10 days of removal. Because otherwise we don't have a way of verifying that the equipment and anything hazardous was removed.
Amanda?
Thank you. If you add that line, I would just recommend changing will to shall to make it a requirement.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions? Okay.
If
Chair, I have a comment if I may.
Oh, sorry. Councilor McLean?
Thank you. My only comment there is if we're going to impose upon the owner to request inspection to make sure they're complying, why wouldn't we ask them to request inspection and compliance for all of the conditions with an appropriate authority, right? So if we're going to ask them to stabilize and revegetate, why wouldn't we then ask them for, likewise inspection and confirmation from, the Conservation Commission or some other sensible authority? So if we're going to get into inspecting and assuring the decommissioning, let's make it global for the whole thing and not just one condition.
that sounds great. Maybe we could put that under the stabilization. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We'll wordsmith that for you
Thank you.
to make it.
Jenna, I see that your hand is still up and I know that you have to drop, so I didn't know if you had a comment or question before you. Let's see.
No, it was just, I do have to leave.
Okay.
And I just, once again, hope that the council considers maximizing the opportunities for solar versus minimizing versus single family homes. So thank you.
Thank you.
For the stabilization in revegetation, having an inspection there, I wonder if rather than an inspection, that would be perhaps an as-built plan or something to that effect. I'd recommend not having it be a conservation agent because some of this land might be outside of conservation jurisdiction. So it might not necessarily be within the conservation agent's jurisdiction. And staff could do an inspection, but I get worried about capacity to be able to do these. I guess there's not going to be a lot of them, but typically we would have a clerk of the works hired and we require as-built plans. So I just want to be considerate to capacity to do these type of inspections.
Yeah, my only concern with that is that, as-built plans don't mean anything realistically when you're on the ground. I mean, people can submit a plan, and unless somebody goes in and inspects the site, you have no idea if what they've done actually conforms to that plan. It happens all the time. I'm involved in construction. We get as-builts. What is actually installed in the building, it's frequently significantly different than what an as-built plan that's submitted said. So if we're talking about enforcing compliance, then I think there needs to be some sort of actual site visit by somebody. And if the conservation agent is not the appropriate person, that's okay. If we have to hire out, I think you're correct. It's not going to be that many occasions that we need to go through it. But if we're going to require something, we should put teeth in it.
I mean, wouldn't the as-built plan just be their plan for what they should put back, and then there would be some kind of inspection to verify that that's what they did? Wouldn't they? It wouldn't be just one or the other. It would be both of them, right?
Right. So the as-built plan would need to be stamped by a certified engineer, or in this case, it would likely be a certified arborist, and then staff would go and make sure, confirm that the as-built plan is accurate. But staff's not, we're not going to be able to shoot grades in the field, and make sure that their grade is what it's supposed to be. But the as-built plan, we take that certified, that stamp as that determination.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could come back when we return with some suggestions on language for confirming that inspection or plans, inspection plans. Saying that wrong. Councilor Marcillo, I see your hand has been up. Did you have a comment or question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My only question is following up on this 10-day inspection and the shall request. What happens if they don't? Is there standard language that we have in ordinances for some sort of what happens if they do not do this?
Beth, did you?
In every ordinance, there is a minimum $50 ordinance violation. I don't know if we put penalties in this. I can't remember. Cassie, did we put penalties in this?
I don't think so, because there weren't any included in the state language. So,
But ordinance violations of $50 per incident.
So would we need, that's not an overarching though, if you violate, it has to specifically be spelled out in the ordinance, correct?
No,
Or it doesn't. Okay.
There's a catch-all in chapter
Okay.
1.
Thank you. Next item, or Councilor Cohen?
Yeah, thank you. Just for people's edification, the timing for these panels to be, decommissioned or abandoned or whatever is probably beyond any of our lifetimes. So I feel like just having this language is good. If we could go down to 612.8, number 1, applicability, it says where these solar energy systems may be accessory to a use allowed to the site through site plan review, the site plan review shall include review of their adequacy, location, arrangement, size, design, and general site compatibility.
this is getting at, roof mounted and small scale ground mounted are,
Right.
they were permitted in every district. And this language is saying, like, if you're already coming in for a site plan review and you plan on having these things, they need to be included as part of that site plan review, but not having a separate site plan review. So again, I'm going to go back to tropical products because they're either.
No, I understand. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Cassie. And if we could go down to number 4, it says adequate net zero energy plan. And my question is there a criteria? What is an adequate net zero energy plan?
It's a plan for how the site is going to get at net zero energy.
Right, but what would make it adequate? What would the criteria be between, a crappy net zero plan and something that is sufficient per the ordinance?
Like most things in our site plan review, we just have adequacy. We have the adequacy of the landscaping on the site, and it's up to the planning board to determine if what is shown on the plan is adequate or not. So
I agree.
I believe it's in the works for us to develop some guidelines for what that looks like, but ultimately it's the planning board's determination of what adequate looks like, similar to how they determine what adequate parking and traffic control looks like, what adequate landscaping looks like.
Right.
I think they have several items that they just determine the adequacy of that don't necessarily have a lot of structure or direction around.
I agree. The reason I bring that up is because even though I'm, really like the composition of the planning board, I don't think there's anyone on the planning board who could perhaps address a solar array with this grade.
Yeah, and we've been working with, I believe, MAPC on some training materials for what that looks like to help get developers ready for it, to help get the planning board ready for it. But we do feel like it's an important step for the city to move its future developments towards that that our sites start getting to net zero. And this doesn't necessarily mean the site has to be net zero today or when it's constructed, but how are they going to move their site towards net zero? So if that's solar, if that's wind, if that's, just using their landscaping to minimize how much energy users are going to need in the future, if that's EV chargers, if that's purchasing energy credits. Like, there's a wide variety of things that people can do to help offset what is going to be produced on their site. And so we're actively working on that as well.
Thank you. I'm going to note that Amanda has her hand up, so she
Yeah.
might have a comment on that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off Cassie's response in terms of how the board determines whether it's adequate or not. The board can and does also ask for third-party reviews through a peer review. So like they do with a traffic and parking study where they don't have a traffic engineer on the board, they'll have a traffic engineer, third-party peer review, look at the plan and determine if it's adequate and provide comments for the board to consider. And so we would see this following that same kind of path where the net zero energy plans may need technical assistance from a peer reviewer. So just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to continue moving on. We do have a second agenda item this evening. So we have other edits that you have in here, Cassie, and Councillor Cohen, if there are any other edits, if you could let us know. But we have, looks like 2 removals related to bicycles in section 11.
Yep, and then a renumbering. Section 12 is also just this part is just striking bike and EV things, short-term bicycle parking. And then getting back to what I had started talking about earlier, staff made a recommendation. Again, this is just a starting talking point. If you don't like this number, we're not tied to it. But it seemed like there was some concern about the medium scale energy systems being allowed to be up to 40,000 square feet, which is almost an acre. So we just cut it in half and said anything over 20,000 square feet is large and medium is 1,700 to 20,000 square feet. Hopefully that would alleviate some of the concerns you had about medium scale being allowed in various districts up in the use table. So.
Thank you. And just again, point of reference, an acre is what, 56,000 square feet? 46, 42?
43,000.
43,000.
I was like, I was mixing up the two numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking back to my old valuation days. Okay, 43, just for mental point of clarification. So about a half acre is the cutoff point for those two. Okay.
Yeah. And again, it's, that was just a response to some of the concerns that I heard. at our last meeting, but open for conversation if you'd like.
Any comments from the committee on that piece? And actually, that looks like, besides the other edit that we have that we're going back to, that is the last edit. So I guess any other edits or comments in general before I will open it up to the public to see if there are any comments from members that have logged in. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not being a member of the committee, I think I'd like to speak a little bit to where we started in the definitions and the question of roof mounted versus ground mounted. I wanted to see some of the other edits and think about that a little bit before I weighed in, but I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Cohen. I think the language in that definition is too broad. It encompasses more types of structures, I think, than even what a layman might enter a space and consider a roof mounted solar structure of any kind. I mean, I'm reading that definition and very much would see, solar panels mounted on a pole, a very high pole, being considered a roof mounted system under that definition. And I don't think even an average person would drive into a parking lot and see poles with solar panels on them and think those are on a roof. So I do think there's something a little bit problematic in that definition. I do think it's a little bit wide for what it's trying to address. And I would probably support striking that red text as well. I don't know that I agree that canopies need their own use table slot, therefore. I think that we started with the idea that certain kinds of installations of that kind are ground mounted, and I think that's good enough. I think if there's confusion about that, then add some clarity to the ground mounted definition and say this would include, a pole mounted structure or something like that. But I think that would be more successful in keeping within the four corners of what we're doing than trying to alter the use table.
I like your note, Cassie. Continue to work on. Sums it up. Councillor Cohen, did you have an additional comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Riccardi. So Beverly had an issue, just because of what I did for 12 years. I know there's a lot of issues that we don't always anticipate, and that's why it's good to have ordinances. But Beverly had an issue where someone installed one of those solar flowers on their front yard, and it really blew up in the city, and they had nothing that governed that. The reason that I wanted a separate definition for canopies is if you look at what we revised in the zoning table, because our school properties are filtered with in many of the different zones, we wouldn't be able to have the canopy solar on a school parking lot if we have, ends from RC to R3. And I don't see anything that would accommodate that in accessory use. So the reason I brought that up, Councilor McLean, was thinking that if we had a separate, item for that with separate zoning, then that would just address our ability to have that. And I do believe that we don't want an ordinance that inhibits us from putting solar panels on spaces that we're not using for anything else, or we wouldn't use for anything else. And this city, just the city properties, the schools and everything else, use 11 megawatts of electricity a year on average. And, Jeff Ely and I and someone from Borrego, which is a very large solar company, commercial solar company, we did a feasibility study at 22 city properties that all had roofs. And the maximum that we could generate if we put solar on every feasible roof was 5 megawatts. So a way to get to where we need to be just to, power the schools, for example, would be to do these canopies on parking lots. So I see Beth's hand up, but I'm hoping that if we can't get a definition with a new line item in the zoning chart, then we're going to have to go back and look at the chart again. Does that make sense, Beth?
Yeah, so municipal uses generally are exempt. So let me work with Amanda and the building inspector on this. I hear what you're saying, and we may be able to solve the problem with a municipal use exemption. Did you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you. I said,
Thank you. Sorry. My silence was thank you.
Okay, I'd like to go to the public to see if there's any comments from the attendees tonight on this ordinance. If you do have a comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom and I will promote you to or allow you to speak. Okay, looks like no comments, but Beth, you still have your hand up. Did you have another comment for us? Okay, just checking. Councilor Marcillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to belabor this, but I just want to keep in mind parks are municipally owned also. And so this is where I think the conversation started, was trying not to allow the large ground mounted solar in parks. And I know that there's no plans to do that. We just don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. And so this was the feedback that I had gotten from people, that they wanted to exempt the RC or the ground mounted in the RC areas because that's where the parks are. I think though, if we can pull out a new zoning area in the future that's just parks and recreation areas and not allow it there, then it will free up a lot of the other concerns. So it just, having a municipal use exemption doesn't cover the park issue, I think is what my comment is.
We can look at that, Counselor. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, any other comments or items for them to look at before we meet again? So to reiterate the timing on this, we do have more time. So the first passage, if this is sent back to council, is due May 12th. So that is the first council meeting for the month of May. So we have next week to meet again on this if we desire for it to go back to council. So we would look at Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday of next week to meet again. So keep those dates open until we figure that out. And looking forward to the edits. If there's anything additional that comes across your mind or other concerns, please reach out to Cassie prior to that meeting as well. Any other comments or questions on this ordinance or motions from the committee? Councillor Cohen?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi. I'm on a roll, so I'm going to make a motion that we keep this in committee. And I want to very much thank Jenna, who's not here, and Cassie, Amanda, and Beth from Planning and Legal.
Second.
Councillor Cohen moves to keep in committee, seconded by Councillor Varela. Do a roll call because we're on Zoom. Councillor Cohen?
Yeah.
Councillor Dominguez?
Yes.
Councillor Presnitsky?
Yes.
And that's everyone, right? And myself is a yes. Can I miss someone? Councillor Varela?
Yes.
I'm sorry. 5-0. That will stay in committee, and hopefully we can work out a time to meet prior to, actually, it doesn't even have to be next week. It could be the week after that, as long as it's before the May 12th meeting, for something to go back to council on the 12th. We good on that? Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much to Cassie for joining and providing your feedback, and to Jenna, who has left early, but we appreciate the work and the efforts that are put into helping get this over the line. And I'll reach out to you about scheduling. Thank you. Okay, and we can move on to our second agenda item of this evening, which is the urban agriculture ordinance. And I'll note that Carrie Murphy from the city has also joined us. And I will also note that Councilor Varela will be recusing himself for the evening. Thank you. Okay, so the same timeline on this one, on the urban agriculture ordinance, because I believe this was the same public hearing as the green infrastructure. So this one also, no, I'm sorry, this was a different meeting. This was the week after. So this public hearing closed on May 15th, and it was at the planning board May 31st. So we have one additional week. So this would need to be in front of council by May 26th for first passage, June 12th for second passage. This went to planning board, and their recommendation did come back. There was one additional edit that the planning board recommended, which was an item that was brought up during the joint public hearing. And that was the initial stance to have it sent to committee this evening to talk that through, as opposed to talking it through on the council floor. And then we also, Carrie and I, this past week, met with some local beekeepers and found out, learned a little more about some sections of that ordinance. So we have the planning board edit recommendations, as well as a few others that we would like to open up for discussion to the committee to provide, or to have feedback on. I guess I can share my screen. There is an updated red line draft that is in the OLA folder. Sorry, I was not ready to share my screen. I will open that up, and we can do a similar process where we go through red lines, and if anyone has additional comments or questions or concerns. I don't think much came up during the public hearing. There were some questions, but I believe everything was addressed. Sorry.
I have it up, Council, if you want me to share.
I'm slowly there. Okay, can you all share my, or see my screen now? Yeah, is that, I can't see you now, so I hope you can.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so there were no changes or recommended changes to the definition section. No changes to the zoning use section. I'll pause there because I see Councilor Merkel has her hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Riccardi, not being a member of committee. I was just wondering if you could enlarge the type on your shared screen if possible.
Sure, let me try that again. I'm so used to Teams now as my daily share. Don't do Zoom. Let me see if I can resize it. Is that better? Yes, okay.
Yes, much,
So,
thank you.
Great. So no changes to the definitions or no recommended changes to the definitions or the zoning table. Again, if anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to raise your hands. We we received feedback on the bees in regards to the sale of products. So one line that we had for sale of products was that everything needed to be produced on site. And one piece of feedback that we received in regard to honeybee hives is that an owner might own hives that are located throughout the city. And then they access, like a friend's lot, and they're the ones that actually own it, but it's on their friend's lot, and it's literally just there to be a location for the bees to go out and get different pollen. And then they collect, and I'm probably saying this incorrectly, they go out and they collect the hives from that, or the honeycombs from that hive, bring it back to their location and process it, in the sense that like pull it out of the hive, and bucket it all together. So it's probably 3 or 4 different hives from around the city, are essentially the honey is all kind of pulled in together into one bucket. So we wanted to somehow add a carve out to allow that, because we specifically said that all products must be produced on the site. And in that case, technically the hives might be on different locations throughout the city. So we added in language, and Beth, I'm not sure if this one went to you, but it was a sentence of, in the case of honeybees, hives must be located on the lot or owned by a resident of the lot. So that is doing the selling of the products. Wanted to open that up for discussion to see if the committee was open to adding a line in regards to allowing honey. In the case of honey, it doesn't need the word bees there. Hives must be located on the lot or owned by the resident of the lot. This is probably, I see some confused looks. So any comments or questions? I'll move on to the next one, because these are all related to hives and honey, and let it kind of sink in. There's also an additional item of sale of products. So again, honey has an exception where it's not just harvested, similar to products that are grown in the ground, from a certain harvesting time of May 1st to October 31st, with the exception of honey. I guess a popular honey processing time is December and Christmas time. So we wanted to keep in the restrictions to have the sales still not be permitted more than 3 days per week, no more than 25 total days per year, but honey could be sold year round, as it is produced year round. Any comments or questions on that one? Okay, now the edits, these were the edits from the planning board, or recommended edits from the planning board. Domestic fowl and bees, again, there might be the situation where they're not necessarily owned by the person that has them on the lot. So we wanted to take out that language there. So for chickens, we revised it for domestic fowl must be owned by a resident or tenant that's not necessarily someone there of the location, who shall be responsible for the care and control of the fowl. I jumped forward in my explanation to the honey, or to the hives. Honeybees must be owned, rented, or hosted by a resident or tenant or owner of the location, who shall be responsible for the care and control of honeybees. So this was the scenario I was just describing, where you often have rented or hosted hives, not necessarily owned by the lot owner or renter that the hive is located on. Also adding in the language or owner of the location for those situations where an empty lot might have a hive on it, maintained by the owner, but again, there's not actually somebody living there because it's an empty lot, so there's no tenant or resident. Councilor Marcillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might be just being dense right now, but what's the difference between a resident and a tenant?
I was thinking more along the lines of commercial, so a resident actually lives there, whereas a tenant is like a business that's there, tenant of the property, somebody that rents. Resident, I think, lives in the property. A tenant does not live full time in the property.
Oh, so you're talking about a commercial property?
Yep.
Can you say commercial tenant then? I just think it's really confusing the way you have a resident or a tenant. If that's the distinction you're making between a home and a commercial property and a tenant and a commercial property, or the owner of an empty lot, I don't know. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's late and I'm just being dense, but it feels redundant, or I don't know.
Yeah, I see Beth is nodding her head. So does that make sense to add commercial tenant?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me turn my track changes back on. Councillor Watson-Phillips?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi, not being a member of the committee. I'm with President Marcillo on this, like, is it late or am I being dense? If we were to say, because I had the same confusion, so I think that that's a really important clarification. I'm glad that, thank you, Councilor Marcillo, for bringing it up. But my next question then is, if we're talking about hosting on commercial properties, is that still within the accessory use, or are we now talking commercial use? I think that's where I'm getting a little bit confused.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to answer that just because I feel like I've talked about this a lot in the last week. So it would be an accessory use because the commercial use of the property would be the main use of the property. So say like a restaurant downtown wants to put a hive on their roof, their main business is that restaurant, and this would just be an accessory use of having a hive on their unless if we have a company that's starting to be a beehive farmer.
Right.
That would be, and they would need their own, right? This wouldn't regulate that at all. This is just purely for accessory use.
So I guess, sorry, may I ask a follow-on question then? So I assume then that there would be some level of regular inspection in a scenario like that, where we want to ensure, like, all of a sudden this restaurant doesn't have like 30 hives on their roof or something like that, that they've added over 2 or 3 years or something. And now they're not just using their own honey, they're selling it.
Yep. So that it's continuing as an accessory use. That's what this hive covers. So the next line does have the maximum of 2 hives kept on the lot for accessory use. And we can actually, if there are no other, I guess, questions on that piece, we can hop into that one because that was our next discussion point.
Yeah, I think my only open question now is just still like with inspection, like, frequencies of inspections and stuff. Thank you.
So the 2 hives, maximum of 2 hives, also came up as a discussion point with the owners, as that could be a hindrance. We have a lot of specialty beekeepers in the city that help when swarms are found, or a hive on your lot itself may need a swarm, which I guess a really dumbed down definition of this could be like you walk by a bush and you see a swarm of honeybees and you want to collectively save them and put them in a hive and put them to good use, as opposed to somebody, coming in and removing them in a not good way or a not safe way. Or a hive on their property might get too large and it, because of a swarm, and needs to like have an emergency breakup, and that one hive that they have all of a sudden becomes 2 hives, and it happens kind of quickly and needs to be done in a fast motion. So we don't want them to have the hindrance of, oh wait, I will keep myself in a risky position because I have to go and get additional approval for those additional hives if they already have 2 on there. So this is kind of a 2-piece discussion topic that we added in a line of, if an emergency or rescue of a swarm results in more than 2 hives on a lot, the Board of Health must be notified within 2 business days. And we have kept in that, or the maximum of 2 hives is still there, but we would like to ask if the committee would feel open to increasing that number to 4 or 5 hives. I don't know if anybody has any major feelings towards that, but I guess 2 hives, there are beekeepers in the city that have more than 2 hives on the lot. Councillor Cohen?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi. I don't know enough about bees to know whether, 1, 2, it seems very arbitrary, the number of hives. So, the fact that there might be as many as 4 or 5 hives on, in the city border now, I'm okay with it, because I don't know what the difference between 2 and 5 would be, other than the example that you gave. So, unless someone has a disagreement, I'm okay with expanding it.
Beth, you had your hand up?
I might want to defer this to the Board of Health. Perhaps you could add in here that, I thought we had it in here, but I'm not seeing it right now.
We do, right here, with additional hives pending approval from the Board of Health.
Oh yeah, there it is. I think I would leave it to the experts rather than, putting it in here as of right.
Which there is a pathway, yeah. Councillor Marcillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with that. I don't know if this is dependent on how much land you have. Is there a space requirement per hive? Can you just put 5 hives on a very small lot? So I guess keeping it at 2, and then with the additional discretion of the Board of Health makes sense to me if they're the experts in this.
So we don't have limitations on the number. With space, there are dimensional requirements in regards to the actual physical size of the hive, and then setback requirements. So that kind of naturally adds some sort of limitations, but no, not that much, because they could all be, lined up amongst each other. And Carrie, would you mind noting the Board of Health piece, especially in regards to, I guess, the beekeeper or bee knowledge?
We do have one inspector who is also a beekeeper, so she might be able to weigh in on that as well. I mean, I think the reason we initially, well, I know the reason we initially limited it was because someone had discussed the fact that if there were too many hives in one area of the city, it could be a potential problem. And this was a way for us to kind of monitor how many and where the bees are before we agreed to let people have additional hives.
Okay, I forgot about that point. Okay, Councillor Merkel?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi. Not being a member of the committee, I also want to express support for, I like that language that the Board of Health, being the most knowledgeable in this area, has the ability to, allow someone additional hives if they feel it's appropriate, and as Ms. Murphy had said, it's not disruptive to the neighbors or anything. That why not have that flexibility? It's beneficial, and I definitely support keeping that option for additional hives being approved in the language here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll point out too, one thing that Carrie just mentioned that I learned is that it's not necessarily to like a space or a size thing, but there's only like so much limited pollen inventory that the bees have to go out to check. So if one person has 7 hives in their backyard, and then their neighbor wants to put 1 hive in their backyard, it's kind of it wouldn't work out well for that one neighbor, because those 7 hives are hoarding all the pollen in the area. Fascinating. Carrie, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say the same thing. I didn't mean to imply that it would be a problem for people having too many bees in one area, that it was more that it would be a problem for the bees.
Cool. Okay. The other item that we wanted to open up for discussion was dimensional regulations. So I believe we copied this from another ordinance, and also in thoughts of our fence height requirement of 6 feet, I believe. But there can be scenarios where a hive might exceed 5 feet in height and 20 cubic feet, more so in the height section, I guess, when the honey starts to collect and pool underneath. Boxes, I forget what the term is, keep getting added on top, and the bees kind of live at the top and the honey drips down. So like during the winter, you might continue to add those on. So it might exceed the 5 feet in height. So we'd like to open that up. I would think 6 feet, which I don't think is much of a change, but we kind of calculated out the different, or the boxes all kind of have standard dimensions. So 6 feet in height gave a good number of boxes. So we'd like to move to increase that, or I can't make a motion as a chair, but that was a request to increase to 6 feet in height, and then doing the math for the cubic feet, that would be 25 cubic feet in size on any lot or roof. Any questions or comments from the committee on that one, or concerns about changing it to 6 feet and 25 cubic feet? Councilor Dominguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the suggestion of the expert in regard to the height? Do we have anybody who know basically who can refer to in a way that we be more solid firm on the decision on increase it or not?
Yeah,
the expert.
The request was, that was where the 6 feet in height and 25 cubic feet came in.
And that suggestion come from the expert, or this is just a?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that we should go ahead and honor. They know exactly what is the best height for that. And I would like to second that. I mean, move the motion if I had to. Thank you.
Thank you. And Beth, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, so I have to move to my car to go do a kid work pickup. So I can put you on in my car. I did review all the other changes. You only got a few more to go through. And those all seemed appropriate to me. But I can pause for now and put you on in the car in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I also too, I will note to Councilor Dominguez, to your question. So the experts that we met with last week were Anita Daly, owner of Beverly Bees. So you probably have heard of or seen down at Artist Row, the honey down there and the bees that are down there. And it's a Beverly business, but obviously she is familiar with all things bees. I believe she said that she was the former inspector for the state for bees as well. So definitely one of the very knowledgeable in the topic, as well as one of my Ward 6 residents that invited us to move a hive as well. So, and they have hives on their property. So when I say those that are knowledgeable on the subject, that was who I'm referencing. Moving on to the next topic of suggested edits were hive placements and flyways. We just had a clarification on the flyway. So there were some concerns about the hive opening. The language as written said the hive opening must face away from doors and our windows. But this is the numbering got a little messed up as I made the edit, so that should be pushed in. So for any ground level hive that's within 20 feet of the door or window of the principal building on an abutting lot, so we're talking about the neighbor's house, then the following conditions must exist. And the original language said the hive opening must face away from doors and or windows. And we're just adding clarification language of the principal building or the abutting lot. So the owner of the hive can't put a hive in within 20 feet of the neighbor's door and having it face directly to their door or window. They can turn it around and have it face directly their door or window, but not their neighbor's. If they do have it face directly the neighbor's door or window, then they have to include a flyway, which could be any structure really. We put in a fence a dense hedge, a similar barrier must exist there. So that's that edit there, just kind of adding clarification language. So it's not read as a flyway needs to be put in all situations. It's just a flyway needs to be put in if the hive opening is facing a neighbor's property. And then the last big edit that we made was also in regards to flyways, that hive placement on a roof doesn't make any sense to have a flyway on there because it will probably fly away. Like I can't imagine putting a fence or a dense hedge on a rooftop. Seems a little dangerous. The hive itself, the hive is pretty heavy and won't be flying away, but I could see it being kind of weird to put a hedge or a fence around it and then have that fly away. So we just removed that requirement and just left the requirement that it can't be placing similar to the one above, the principal, instead of a principal abutting lot because it's on a roof, we put shared access space, so like a shared door entry or something like that to the roof. It needs to be facing away from that. And also in here, we would make the same edits for the hive size. So instead of 5 feet, it would be 6 feet in height and 25 cubic feet in size on any lot or roof. We're all buzzing with excitement tonight, guys. Oh, I just had to get that in, sorry. Okay. Okay, so that was all I had for bees. There are also the Board of Health regulations that Beth referenced earlier that is going to be in front of the Board of Health May 10th, I believe. And that has a lot of additional items, especially in regards to the item that Councillor Watson-Felt noted about inspections and permitting and all of that, all of those details. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Obviously, we did just go over the bee piece, but anything else in general? Carrie, did you have another comment? Sorry.
Do we also want to go over the domestic fowl, the spacing for the coops and runs, or was it just bees that was on the agenda tonight?
No, so the whole ordinance is on the agenda. So there was another, yeah, sorry. I keep forgetting about that one. There was no actual edit made in here. I think that's why I keep.
Yeah, I think I must have not saved it. I sent it to you in an email, but I have it up now, but I can tell you. So it was under size for numbers 2 and 3, because chickens, we were discussing this at the meeting with Anita Daly. She also raises chickens, brought up that because different sized chickens have different spacing requirements, and then larger birds like ducks or turkeys also have different space requirements. If we want to change that to something more general, and I also found a little chart from the Penn State Extension School that gives the different space requirements for coops and runs for different birds that we could refer people to.
So the general language that you would have, you would suggest must allow a minimum of 4 square feet, removing the coop space part, must allow a minimum of.
Yeah, I found another example from another city ordinance where it just says adequate housing must be provided for domestic fowl to protect them from wind, weather, predators, shall provide ample ventilation, ample space to allow them to move freely, and an area out of direct sunlight to lay eggs. We could also provide the resource or a chart for the different space requirements for different types of fowl.
I'm just going to add in, I believe that was the language that you just mentioned. that what you were saying, to add that and remove the 4 square feet per fowl?
Yeah, and actually when I was reading about the runs is actually more. It could be up to 8 square feet for a chicken. So it's, I'm wondering if we should put that all under one, like for coops and runs. Just because there'd be different spacing requirements for runs as well for different size birds. And just combine the two.
So as opposed to adding an arbitrary 4 square feet per fowl, which I think the state regulation per chicken is like one or 2 square foot. Adequate housing and runs must be provided for domestic fowl to protect them from wind, weather, and predators. Housing shall provide plenty of ventilation, ample space to allow fowl to move freely, and an area out of direct sunlight to lay eggs. Are there other state, and I'm sorry, I can't see if anyone else has their hand raised. Are there other state regulations around coop size, or is it just the chickens and 1 square foot per chicken or 2?
I did not see anything for the state of Massachusetts with specific space requirements. And I could look into that. I just found those charts from the different extension schools. So I'm assuming it must be similar.
Any comments from the committee on that revision? Councilor Marcillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a comment on this one. Can we move on to another one?
Yes.
Okay, the very first one, I'm still stuck on that, the sale of products.
Yep.
Okay, if we're talking about the sale of honey and you're talking about dispersed hives, I think that's what you were saying, that an owner could have hives at several different locations and then collect the honey and sell it at one location. That's not what I'm getting from this. So in the case of honey, hives must be located on the lot or owned by the resident of the lot. So that doesn't take the dispersed hives, right? That still says that the hives have to be located on the lot where the honey is sold. Is that what you wanted it to say?
Yeah, it's almost like owned by, I think I'm missing some words, owned by a resident of the lot that is doing the selling. But that's not, I feel like that's not a good legal term.
So, so you're saying that even though okay. So that's the dispersed part. Okay. So
I guess the actual collection and mixing of it is a very specialized, not everyone does that.
So then if I could just follow on, if you're just letting someone put a hive on your lot for the bees, you're not then selling it, right? You're not necessarily even touching the bees or the honey. Okay.
Correct.
All right. So, okay.
But somebody else might be that is allowing you to.
Okay.
Like yeah. If you have a hive and you become a beekeeper and then your neighbor's like, oh, you can definitely put one on my lot because again, the whole like dispersion of the pollen thing, but the neighbor is just allowing it to be on the lot and doesn't want anything to do with the honey or the collection. It all kind of collects into the same pot and allowing the person that collects it to sell. I'll double check for Beth to review that as well to make sure it makes sense.
So actually in this case, the owner of the hives might not even have any hives on their lot, but they're selling honey from that space, even though there's not hives there. Are we allowing that?
Yeah. Yeah. In the case of honey, hives must be located on the lot or owned by a resident of the lot selling. Yeah, because they would be the one collecting the honey from their hives.
Okay,
So-
I think we need to think about that a little bit. I don't
So they
have a
would-
problem necessarily, but
Yeah, they would own the hive, so they would own that hive. It just wouldn't be on their lot. It would be on, so it's still like their honey. It's just not located on their lot for the foraging part.
then can I ask you this? And I don't mean to open up a hornet's nest here. Boom, boom.
But
What if people have a community garden and they grow their vegetables in the community garden? Can they then sell it at their home?
So this ordinance is specifically related to just accessory use. So I believe a community garden, that's the use case of the community garden. So this isn't related to that scenario because
But
vegetables are not grown on their property.
But the honey is not produced on the property. That's what I'm trying to say. Like we're carving out something for bees here.
Oh, are
where
you
you're
saying
selling-
a hive in a community garden? Sorry.
No, I'm saying that this is allowing someone to sell honey, even though the hives are located elsewhere. They're able to sell honey on their property, even though they may not have hives on their property. Right? The hives are located elsewhere. So are we then allowing someone to sell vegetables at their home, even though they're grown in a community garden off of their property?
There's an additional step to the honey piece that the owner would have to do to like extract it from the hive, and that's a produce on site piece. Like a hive itself doesn't actually, it produces the honey. I'm saying this wrong. We might have to go to our experts that are in the audience to help explain this one. Yeah, I see what you're saying. This is a specific call out though to just honey and not community garden items.
And to that, can I just continue here? If you have a garden, a vegetable garden on your property, and you're selling the stuff from your garden, and you also happen to have a community garden where you're growing vegetables, are we just allowing the sale of those vegetables? I mean, I don't know. This is sort of, how are you going to tell what comes from where?
Yeah,
I don't have a problem.
This is
Yeah.
just to allow the sale for items produced on site, but requesting the exception of honey. I don't know how one would be able to inspect and say, where did those vegetables come from? I feel that might be one that would have to be self-regulated or neighborly regulated. Carrie, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I guess just referring to the community garden example, all the community gardens are on municipal land, so I don't think you can sell anything that using city property, but the hives likely could not be put on city property, I'm guessing. Correct? I mean, you would need permission from the city to do
You
that.
would need permission.
So it would likely be, a neighbor or somewhere else where you'd get the permission from the owner of the lot to put the hive on the property, but then you would be responsible for bringing it back, doing the extracting and producing the honey yourself on your own property, correct? And selling it on your property.
Councillor Cohen?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi. I'm not sure if this is exactly in line with what Council President Morcillo said, but I'm not concerned about the community gardens because I don't see that as an issue. However, my concern is that I believe this ordinance is meant to encourage people who, have bees or, produce or, chickens on their property can sell it at their property. So I'm not sure if these edits are encouraging something beyond that. Because I thought the intent was for people to be able to sell what they produce on their property at their property.
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a second, so I missed the beginning part of that question. Or was that more of a comment?
I'm not sure if we should be, enabling people to, I'm going back to what the intent and the purpose of this ordinance is. And we seem to be expanding that through the bees and honey and not other components of the ordinance.
Gotcha. Any other comments or questions? Carrie, do you still have your hand? Did you want to comment on that or just?
Yeah, I guess just one of the things I wanted to say is that when we were writing the ordinance, we didn't have the best understanding about beekeeping, and just in these last few meetings with Anita and Rich, had learned that most beekeepers do move hives around from lot to lot, just to expose the bees to different pollinators, so sources of pollen. So that was why we proposed these changes, just to acknowledge that from what we've learned, it sounds like hives move around quite a bit. They may not always stay on one piece of property. And it sounds like that's an advantage to the bees.
Councilor Merkel?
Thank you, Chair Riccardi, not being a member of the committee. I wanted to comment that I would find it disappointing to lose, the portion of encouraging the bees in this ordinance. And also, I, as I've learned, and thank you all for your work on this, about that the bees are really quite different than produce. Like you said, someone could grow produce and bring it over there and sell it, but there's too much of a process involved. And to Miss Murphy's point, that the bees, you just can't, grow anywhere and then bring it over to sell. There seems to be a need for flexibility in location. And that's what I see this gives, not really, a free pass to put bees everywhere and then start, a business of honey at your location. It's more that you have to work with what works for the bees. And it just seems like this is something that needs a little bit more flexibility. And a person would have to give, permission for having that. It seems to me that this would be neighbors working together, that, my property, doesn't have the pollination, it can't accommodate this. Can we work together? I'll do the processing, and can we have the bees over there? I think this is just adding necessary flexibility, for allowing the use of bees. I don't see this as a direct connection as to, a community garden or somewhere. Now produce will come from everywhere and be sold somewhere else. I see this as a little bit more complicated in creating a path forward for this option. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this one? In the committee or committee of the whole? Councilor Prosniewski?
Just real quick, Madam Chair. I think everybody here understands the importance that bees are to our future, to our health, to our environment, and our future. And I don't want to see something distracted from the importance of this. So I just think we should move on as it is. And if we have to cross that bridge about a later argument about another type of business, then we can deal with it then. But this is too important of an issue to just have it stalled by something that may not even be brought up a little bit later. Thank you.
Okay, we do have two members from the audience with their hands up, so I like to open it up for public comment. How do I do this? Sorry. First, Anita Deely, if you could please state your name and address, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, my name is Anita Deely. I live in Beverly, Mass, but I have a business on Artist Row, a beekeeping business. I also was a state bee inspector for 7 years for the state of Massachusetts, where my job as the state inspector was to inspect honeybees across the state for health and disease. So I've seen a lot of honeybee situations, a lot of hives kept in a lot of different ways and everything. And I really appreciate you making the changes to the beekeeping part of the ordinance and meeting with Rich and I. I just have two comments. One, in terms of selling the honey. So because you have a limitation of 2 beehives on a property, sometimes in the management of beehives to propagate the bees for the bees' health and to keep them from swarming, you have to make splits of your beehive, which would cause you to actually have more than 2 hives. And a lot of times people will want to move those to another property and not keep them on their property. So that's one reason that hives are moved around. The other reason is to follow the pollination. So you might move your hives to someone's garden to pollinate their blueberry trees or their apple orchard, and then move them back to your property. So that's why we asked for this provision in terms of selling the honey. When you go to harvest the honey, you take the honey from all of your hives, and most beekeepers will mix that together. So if you have 2 hives on your property and 1 or 2 hives somewhere else, you would take all of the honey at one time and mix that together. Usually beekeepers do that around October. And then you process that in an extractor and bottle it. And then once it's bottled, like, the honey never goes bad. So an average hive can make nothing up to 150 pounds of honey. 150 pounds of honey is really rare. I would say, like, our average hives, we have over 100 hives, make 5 to 10 pounds of excess honey across all of them. So you're not talking about a lot of honey that someone would be selling, just so you understand that. Also, like, the amount of honey that people can make from a hive. If it's a booming hive, maybe they'll be lucky and get 60 pounds of honey or something, but you don't really make a lot of honey from 1 or 2 beehives. So that's what I just wanted to say about that. And then in terms of the number of hives, I would really encourage you to move that at least up to 4 hives, because I know you currently have beekeepers in Salem that probably no one even knows they have bees that have more than 2 hives already on their property, and they're not causing a nuisance or anything like that. And it just because if someone does want to actually make honey for themselves, you might not get anything from 2 hives of honey, 2 beehives, if you do actually want to make honey. So that's the other thing. And then you're worried about them eating all the pollen because there's too many hives in the area. That's really not something that you should be worried about. Rich Gerard, if he's on, he can talk about this, but the Essex County Beekeeper Group, I think there's only 5 beekeepers in Salem currently who are members of that group. So there's not a lot of beekeepers in Salem. And also, as a state inspector, the only time that we would see bees starving and lack of honey is when people put like hundreds of hives in one area. So if someone has 4 hives and then the person next door has 4 hives and the person next door has 4 hives, you don't have to worry about them using all the resources because they fly 5 miles. So that's just also, so I would really encourage you to at least bump it up to 4 hives. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge as well with us and providing comments this evening. Also in the audience, we have Brenda Cassane. I am going to allow you to talk. Can you please state your name and address for the record?
Hi, my name is Brenda Cassane. My address is 28A Federal Street, Unit 2. in Salem. I want to thank everyone so much for the discussion today, and I want to really express my support for doing all that we can to encourage beekeeping in the city. I think it's so important, and I think that bees are such a vital part of our food system and the wellness of our local plants that I think it's really, really important. And I wanted to highlight too, I think that there have been conversations in larger council meetings about like the safety, and I want to highlight how really safe bees that produce honeys are, and how in cities like Worcester and Cambridge that have adopted similar flyaway distances and et cetera, haven't had any problems. And so I want to really, voice my support and just highlight how safe the bees are. And I also want to voice how I agree with the comment made before me and earlier that I really do think we should increase the number of hives people are allowed to have to at least 4. For so many reasons, and especially, as was mentioned earlier in the discussion, sometimes for the health of a hive, you'll need to split it, and or maybe you want to adopt a swarm that otherwise might be killed by a neighbor, but you could save it. And so I think it would be really important for people to be able to have at least 4 hives, or maybe even only and especially in the situation of a swarm. I think that's really important. And I also think it's this wasn't talked about super specifically, but I think there's language around like flyaway zones and the distance from property. And so I think it's very reasonable and good, in fact, to establish flyaway zones 5 feet away from a property line or 10 feet away from a sidewalk. Like, I feel really comfortable with that. And so thank you for everyone's time. And yeah, I just overall want to really say that as a Salem resident, I want to do everything possible to make it easier for people to keep bees and for this to be an important part of the ordinance being passed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda, for joining us tonight, for talking about bees, and for providing your comments. Appreciate it. Next, we have Richard Gerard. I'm going to allow you to speak. If you could please state your name, we have to unmute and state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, thanks for your time. My name's Richard Gerard. I live on 11 Saltwall Lane in Salem, and I am also on the board of directors for the Essex County Beekeepers Association, which is based out of the Topsfield Fairgrounds. We have about 300 members, and I would say that I went and I'm also the membership secretary, so I did go look that up. Yes, there are only 5 or 6 beekeepers in all of Salem, and without echoing and repeating my 2 previous speakers' points, they kind of brought up what I had in mind. Again, 2 hives is a number, I think, that, as Councillor Cohen put it, is kind of arbitrary. And as Councillor Merkel said, you want to do what works for the bees. And if you have 2 regular hives and those hives are doing very well, one of the things you're going to want to do is to split them to keep them from swarming. And so even a first-year beekeeper who would have 2 hives, I had 2 hives my first year, you can go from 2 to 4 just like that. And again, it's like splitting a stock. You're going to have the same amount of bees, but just in 4 boxes and not 2, but it keeps the swarming down. So again, I would also encourage having a look at increasing that number to 4 or perhaps even 5. Also, to get back to the only other comment I was going to make was when we were talking about the sale of products, the extra, and you may be reworking the language, but the extra wording that Councilor Riccardi put in there, I think the original wording was better, because to be more explanatory, you want the hives from which the source honey is coming from to be on a lot that is owned by either the owner of the hive or the resident of the property where that hive is located. And by adding the extra words, the lot doing the selling, well, say I have 2 hives at my house and over winter, I have lost them both, which unfortunately in the New England area, the annual loss rate is usually around between 2/3 and 3/4 of all bees die every winter. And some people choose not to necessarily replace them, but that doesn't mean that I might not have hives over at a friend's house who knows nothing about bees, but wanted me to manage them over here or over there, be they in Salem or not in Salem. And if I've been managing those hives, I might bring the honey back for extraction here to Saltwall Lane. And, if I wanted to put a little sign that says, hey, honey at the end of Saltwall Lane, it could be possible that I don't have any hives actually on the lot of the person doing the selling. It's not likely, but it's just one example. So again, thank you all for your time. I very much see an overwhelming desire by everyone here to do what is good for beekeepers. And in fact, that's our mission at the Essex County Beekeepers Association, is to be an educational platform. And so I invite you to reach out to me if you have any questions at all on bees or beekeeping. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you again for sharing your knowledge and for speaking this evening and providing your comments. Appreciate it. We also have Cheryl Profuse in the audience. I'm going to allow you to speak. Please unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record.
Hello. Oh gosh, of course. Hold on a second. My AirPods just died. In that moment. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. Perfect timing. So hi, I'm Cheryl Rafuse. I live at 84 Barstow Street in Salem. I run a gardening business. The business is based out of Beverly, but I live in Salem. I have a lot of clients here. I just wanted to note that, like, as a person who works essentially like right next to bees, like every single day, like honeybees, bumblebees, all types, they're pretty docile. I know that I think in previous discussions there was some concern about safety, and unless you like actively like search out and bother a bee, they really just want the pollen. And like I'm constantly just kind of like moving them out of the way and picking them up and everything. And I know that this is something that, people are afraid of bees. It happens, but they're really not nearly as scary as people think. The other things that I wanted to mention, most were noted, I think, by people who know a lot more about bees than me. So yeah, I'm just excited that there's so much interest in, kind of working with the land and yeah, hopefully with all this interest in beekeeping, people will also be interested in some of our native bee species too. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for providing comment tonight and joining us in the discussion. I think that is it for comments from the attendees. If anyone else would like to speak, please just raise your hand. I would like to go back to a few comments that were follow up from those comments in the audience. One of the items is the sale of products that we have gone through a few times. I revised the language a little bit, simplify it some, to have it read that in the case of honey, hives must be either located on the lot or harvested on the lot. And I think that covers both scenarios where the owner of the hive will place hives elsewhere, perhaps their neighbor's lot, or they bring it back to harvest. And I didn't know if harvest or extract was the correct term there. But I think that simplified it a little more, as opposed to saying like whether you own the hive or whether you were selling it on your property. It's basically those two actions seem to be what needs to happen for the honey to be produced. Either you have the hive somewhere and then there's the extraction step of it. So one or the other, the person selling it needs to be involved in that process, either owning the hive or extracting it on their property. Does that make the committee feel make a little more sense with that language? Go back to my screen so I can see. Councillor Cohen, you have your hand up. I don't know. Regards to this.
Yes, thank you, Chair Riccardi. So I want to preface my remarks by saying that I was part of the working group for this ordinance as the liaison from the Sustainability and Resiliency Committee. And even though I don't really know about how to do any of the things that are included in this ordinance from a sustainability standpoint, yes, bees are really super important for a lot of reasons. And, our intention was to create an ordinance that would encourage people to participate more on their property. And that would sequester carbon and, enable more things that would make our city resilient. I also think that having been in the working group, maybe people who are, viewing this for the first time may not be aware that, we have a robust involvement from the Board of Health, which was incredibly involved, particularly Kerry and other people, in putting this together. And, I think one of the things that we thought about was that the Board of Health is more flexible in some ways than an ordinance. So, I know there's all different levels of, people's participation as far as, beekeeping, for example. And so I'm not sure, personally, if I want to expand the number. I know it's arbitrary to me, but having the approval of the Board of Health, I think, is really important because not everyone is experienced in some of these things as Richard and Anita, for example. And so I think that people who have been doing this for a long time really understand the process, but people who are maybe starting out, maybe not so much. So, I'm not, voicing an opinion other than want to stress that the intent of this ordinance was to really, cultivate much more of people growing and selling things from, their own property.
Thank you, Councillor Cohen. Any other comments from the committee? Or questions? Councillor Dominguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to honor the request of the expert, two or three members of the public in regard to increase the number. I would like to make a motion that if it's possible, we can do the correction to, if everybody agree with that, we increase it to 4 instead of 2, so that will accommodate more or go in comply with more of the opinion of the expert or people who know basically about the betterness of this ordinance. So if it is a motion that I had to make, I want to move it. If not, just add it to or make the correction if everybody agree with. Thank you.
So we have Councillor Dominguez made a motion to change the maximum of 2 hives to 4 hives. We have a lot of edits within this, I think, and we're past my own role of 8 p.m. But I would like to, I think we've had a lot of discussions around these. I'd like to maybe go through and see if there are if further discussions are needed on any specific edits, or if we can go through and start reviewing the edits that we have. Does that sound good? And then either make one motion at the end or split it into 2 motions. So the first edit that we have, again, no edits in the definitions. We were good with that. The first edit that we have is within the sale of products. So pulling out the carve out for honey and hive location, because the original definition says all products sold on the lot must be produced on site. So adding additional language as to what that means for honey. And in the case of honey, hives must either be located on the lot or extracted on the lot. So one or the other. Any comments or concerns with that edit, or should we include it in a motion? Councillor Cohen?
I don't have a problem. Are we doing this all one motion to cover all the edits, or I thought you were asking if we had an issue with this particular one?
How about we do motions per section? So we'll do the sale of products. So there are 2 edits in this section. the extraction on the lot and exception of honey, which may be year round.
I move that we accept these revisions.
I second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call, Councillor Cohen,
Yes.
Dominguez,
Yes.
Presnitsky,
Yes.
and myself is a yes. So I will move on from sale of products. The second is domestic fowl. So this is a combination of edits from the planning board, which was domestic fowl must be owned by a resident or commercial tenant of the location. Again, adding in those businesses that are using it as an accessory use. And then the second edit is regarding the coop size. We have realized that the 4 square feet per fowl might be too restrictive for those birds that would require larger square footage, such as turkeys or ostriches. I don't know, is that a domestic fowl? I'm trying to think, it's getting late. And adding it into coops and runs. And this language was sent to Beth, but it was just in the email and that didn't get into this version that I had. With adequate housing and runs must be provided for domestic fowl to protect them from wind, weather, and predators. Housing shall provide plenty of ventilation, ample space to allow fowl to move freely, and an area out of direct sunlight to lay eggs. And those 2 edits are the only edits to the domestic fowl section. Do I have any motions on that section?
I move we accept the revisions.
Second.
Okay. Councillor Cohen moves to accept section 2 domestic fowl revisions, seconded by Councillor Dominguez. Any further discussion? We'll move to roll call. Councillor Cohen?
Yep.
Councillor Presnitsky?
Yes.
Councillor Dominguez?
Yes.
And myself is a yes, so that passes 4 to 0, sorry. Next section we had no changes to the setback requirements. So now the honeybee section. The first item A was revisions from the planning board. So honeybees must be owned or rented by a resident or commercial tenant or owner of the location who shall be responsible for care and control of the honeybees. A maximum of, and we can split out this motion if needed, a maximum of 4 hives must be kept or may be kept on the lot with additional hives pending approval from the Board of Health. Additional Board of Health regulations may further limit. Additional red line of in an emergency or rescue of a swarm results in more than 2. That would have to be revised to 4 if we accept that revision. On the lot, the Board of Health must be notified within 2 business days. An edit to the dimensional requirements from 5 feet to 6 feet and 25 cubic feet. And then an edit to clarify the flyway, that the hive opening must be facing away from the principal building of an abutting lot, that the fence should be solid, and that there should be no flyway needed on roof hives, as it would, I'd love to say this, the flyway would just fly away if it was on the roof. So any comments from the committee of either, and Carrie, I see your hands up. I want to make sure I'm not missing something.
No, I just wanted to add in one thing about the additional hives, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just from a public health standpoint, I just wanted to note that bees are much different than chickens as far as creating a public nuisance or potential for disease or rodents. There really isn't very much that bees can do to create any issues. There's no noise, odor, the same, anything that like having too many chickens could potentially create. And if it's not detrimental to the bees and it's not a space issue that we've heard from our bee experts, then I don't see a reason why we shouldn't increase it to 4. If you want to defer to the health agent on this, I would totally understand, but just from what I've learned and just what I know about the bees and the chickens, it doesn't seem like there would be much of an issue to increase from 2 to 4.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'm gonna open it up. As chair can't make a motion. We could have, if I would suggest, if anyone is thinking of voting differently on the two items, to move for two motions. One motion of all edits in section 3 except for CI, or a motion of all edits in section 3. Councillor Dominguez?
I want to make a motion to accept change on section 3.
Okay, Councillor Dominguez moves to accept all edits in section 3. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Presnitsky. Any further discussion on this item? Okay, Councillor Cohen? Oh,
yeah, I'd like to talk about it a little bit. So I'm fine with 4 as long as we all agree that the wording for the Board of Health regulations and approval is strong enough. Because like I said, I'm really not concerned about people who have been beekeepers and have experience, but I'm more concerned about people who don't. And that's kind of why we write ordinances. So if I'm just asking the other 3 people on the committee, if you feel like the additional Board of Health regulations may further limit the number and or manner of keeping of honeybees on lot is strong enough, then I'm fine with passing it as is.
I know I feel comfortable with that language myself.
Yeah.
Councillor Dominguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to agree with the comments we had in the beginning with people who know the issue more than maybe us. But I also agree with what the good Councilor Cohen just said. Even though if we don't see any risk on having a level to be up, I think that we should go with the language. Let's go with the expert opinion at this moment, and let's have something that is going to be feasible and doable for the great city. I don't think that that's going to make any big difference between people who doesn't know and people who know about it. I have nothing to do. I don't know nothing on the regard, but I relied, and we had to rely on expert opinions, and I think that's have a very heavy, for me, a heavy weight when it's come from people who know exactly what they're talking about. So I'm in favor, and I'm comfortable with the language.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'm going to go to roll call vote then for Councillor Dominguez's motion to
Carrie had her hand up. Megan, I think Carrie has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, that was from last time.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so Councillor Dominguez's motion, seconded by Councillor Presnitsky, for to recommend the red lines noted in section 3. Councillor Cohen?
Sure, why not?
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Councillor Dominguez?
Yes.
Councillor Presnitsky?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. 4-0. Again, as a reminder, these are the edits that we're suggesting to council for amendments on the floor Thursday night. Okay, so that covers everything. There we go. Those are all the red lines that we have from past the joint public hearing. Thanks everyone for sticking it out to 8:22. It's past our bedtimes here, but I think it's one of the longest solo meetings. But we got through a lot tonight. I appreciate it. We will report back out to council on Thursday. These requested or suggested amendments. Do I have any other further amendments in regards to the ordinance as a whole that we would like to report out to the council? Might I suggest for the council to for first passage as amended. Councillor Cohen?
Yes, thank you, Chair Riccardi. I move that I know I'm not always doing this right, that we refer it back with a positive recommendation for first passage.
As amended?
As amended, thank you.
Awesome.
Second.
Almost got it.
We're getting better, guys. So Councillor Cohen moves to recommend back to council for first positive recommendation for first passage as amended, seconded by Councillor Dominguez. Any further discussion? Okay, Councillor Cohen?
Yep.
Councillor Dominguez?
Yes.
Councillor Presnowski?
Yes.
And myself is a yes, so that passes with a 4-0 vote. Thanks, everyone. Any further motions this evening?
Motion to
Councillor
adjourn.
Dominguez? Councillor Dominguez makes a motion to adjourn, seconded by Councillor Presnowski. Roll call vote on adjournment. Councillor Cohen?
Yeah.
Councillor Dominguez?
Yes.
Councillor Presnowski?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I would just like to definitely say thank you to the public comments that were provided this evening and for all staff that came out. Carrie, thank you so much for all of your feedback. I know Cassie and Jenna are gone as well, but thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.